next Monday.
I'm glad that James got in on.
Yes.
But I can either have any questions.
Alright, it's 7 o'clock, so we might get started. Our live stream is also now on, just to let everyone know. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the land that we meet on today is the traditional lands of Gawler people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Gawler people as the custodians of the Great Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still important to the living Gawler people today. Now, thank you so much for everyone coming this evening. We're in a really interesting era of growth for the town of Gawler and the role it will play within the outer north in that regional context. This project has been ongoing since just after I started, around I think August we commenced, and we're looking to complete that project within the 12-month period, looking at the long-term spatial vision for the town centre, including land use, movement, public realm, built form, to create a vibrant, accessible and resilient town centre for the future. When you see how much work's gone into this project today, I hope you can recognise the solid commitment from our consulting team, who I'll introduce in a second. But we're excited to share some of that background information and where we've gone since the last time we spoke to you, which I think was actually in November. Tonight we'll break the presentation down into 3 sections. At the end of each section, we'll have a discussion point where you can ask questions, provide feedback. I will bring around, in a little bit of time, some paperwork and some post-its, so that way as they're going through the presentation, if you have any thoughts or ideas, just jot them down, and then at the central point, we'll hold for questions and feedback from everyone collectively. So I don't want to hold up this session, get straight into the good stuff. So I just wanted to introduce Michael from Jensen Plus, who'll introduce his consulting team, and really excited to have them all here with you for the first time this evening. Normally it's just been Michael, myself and Pat, but yeah, we've brought along the sub-consultants today as well to answer any good questions and walk you through their own background studies and information. So with that, I'll hand over to Michael.
Thanks, Stacey. Good evening, councillors and staff. Great to see you again. Thanks for the opportunity to come back and continue this really important discussion about Gawler Town Centre. Michael McKeown from Jensen Plus, so I'm really the consultant lead. Got a few of my colleagues here. Pat, also from Jensen Plus. Put your hand up, Pat. Assisting. We've got Martin from BE Engineering, who's been working on the transport planning, and also Mike from Phillips Pilkington Architects, who will be talking about some of the design and heritage matters. Susan Phillips is an apology. She is unfortunately unwell. She's had a bit of a bad run of illness and injuries, and so isn't able to attend herself. Really important session tonight. We've got lots of concepts and strategies that we've been working through to share with you and to hear your feedback on and to discuss and talk about how we think Gawler Town Centre can remain the heart of this region and a really important centre for the future. So before we get into the new stuff though, just a bit of a recap on where we went, where we were last time. So 19th of November we had our first workshop, and we talked about the study area, and we talked about the localities and the character and the differences between really the centre of Gawler around Murray Street. We talked about the Adelaide Road precinct up to the station in the north. We also talked about the aims of this project. So just as a refresh, I suppose, the overall aim is to guide and attract future investment in Gawler Town Centre, and we've got some objectives there. And we have split the project kind of into 2 phases. There's a structure plan, which is quite long term, setting the land use vision and really guiding the form of development that we want to see in the future. And that's really got that longer 20 to 30 year time frame. And then we've got a shorter term, kind of more action oriented section called the Development Delivery Framework, which focuses on public realm opportunities, which focuses on transport improvements. And that's been designed and costed, and that's more of a short term or short to medium term 10-year plan. So we talked through that. We also explained some of the background information. One of the important bits of research we did was looking at the land use needs for the future. So there's a lot on this slide. Some of you have seen it before, I think most of you have. But we talked about how to manage and to some degree take advantage of a growing population in the northern region around Gawler. We need to plan for more retail space, so we're expecting to see potentially up to 16,000 square metres of future demand for retail, which could happen in Gawler Town Centre or could happen in other locations. We also project that there could be a need for some form of residential development, relatively modest numbers, 200 or so, but that could be part of the mix. We talked about demand for office development, we talked about healthcare, we talked about visitor accommodation, and we talked as well about community attractors, whether they be entertainment and hospitality attractors, or even public or community spaces or community buildings to support a future population. So that's almost like the brief, if you like, going into the structure plan, what we should be planning for, what we should be testing. And we also workshopped with yourselves various things. We talked about what your visions might be, and we heard about individually some of your sort of one big ideas, whether that was about Murray Street as a place or whether it was about more the characteristics of the town centre, a place where people kind of connect and come together. We talked about the land use mix, we talked about ideas for traffic and parking, residential accommodation. We drew all this in alongside working with other stakeholders as well. We also did a few quick questions with you might remember. So we did a kind of, would you rather have larger scale shopping centres or more small independent shops? In that meeting, the councillors who were here were, I suppose, biased towards the smaller independent retail, so we'll see how well we've translated that into the plan. We also talked about whether we supported more visitor accommodation or more residential options, and visitor or short-term accommodation was more of an emphasis for yourselves. We thought a little bit about whether we should continue to focus investment and attention more in Murray Street, or whether we should put more emphasis over the river towards Adelaide Road, and I think Murray Street was a much stronger preference. We also talked about Murray Street in a bit more detail, and transforming Murray Street into a more pedestrian-friendly space with more people space, more outdoor dining space, stronger landscape was a strong preference from the group. And we also workshopped some different principles, so I created this slide after the meeting, but there were various principles and ideas, and we did a bit of ranking, you might remember, and the idea of Gawler Town Centre being the heart of the region was strongly supported, with at least 4 councillors picking that one. But other elements were community identity, uniqueness and distinctiveness, whether that's through design or land use, and leveraging heritage. They were all very strongly supported, and there was less support right down the bottom for other ideas like event spaces or greener Gawler as a landscape feature, and then there's lots of stuff in the middle. We did similar exercises with the business and community reference group as well, which was really good. They had many similar preferences, although probably more of a leaning towards being ready for investment and being flexible to allow business, and business investment was a bit stronger in that group's preferences as well. So that was just a recap on what we workshopped in November. Most of you took part in that. Turning back to today then, we've done a lot of work since then, and we want to take you through the components of the draft structure plan in 3 sections, as Stacey suggested. So first of all, I'll present the sort of higher level vision and strategy and key moves that we've illustrated for the structure plan. And that should take about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes to present, and then we'll pause and have a discussion, so there'll be a chance for all councillors to discuss what's in that section. And once we've covered that, we'll move on to a second presentation that Pat and Mike will take us through around design and heritage and zoning. And again, after that, we'll have a chance to discuss that. And then lastly, Martin and myself will present some of the movement in place concepts, which is a transport public realm designs. And then again, we'll have a chance to discuss and reflect on those. And we might be pretty tired by then, but we'll have a lot of material covered. And so we've got a few minutes at the end. Stacey will bring us back to the programme and what the next steps will be, including your proposed public consultation programme in a couple of months' time. So that's what we're going to go through. So, vision and strategies and key moves. So I guess our overall tagline for the moment is Gawler Town Centre at the heart of the region. And we do think that's really important because we do think there'll be competition for investment in this region with large greenfield growth areas. And we want to make sure Gawler remains the biggest centre. And so explaining that vision a little bit more, I'll just focus on some of these words, but we know that the town of Gawler is very strategically positioned in a growth area of Metro Adelaide. And our vision for the town centre is really to strengthen its role as a district centre and the primary town centre, servicing established and emerging communities. That sort of town centre first thing is like really important for this plan. And so we want to continue to provide that really wide range and mix of business and retail and community services, and really be the region's principal meeting place. We want everyone to think of Gawler Town Centre as the place, you know, one of those number one place that they're going to come and do business or do community interaction. And we've explained on the right-hand side there how we're going to do that and some of the themes which we'll go through, the characteristics of the town centre. But the vision is the heart of the region, and we'll build upon all the elements of that through the rest of the plan. So underpinning the vision, we've got 6 strategic directions. So they are also explained in the long form text there that you can read later. It's written in the full document. But we've got 6 strategic directions which really support that overall vision. So the first one again is almost repeating the heart of the region, being the largest, most diverse and most important centre in the Gawler area. Our second strategic direction is about being distinctively Gawler. And that's about design, that's about leveraging the heritage values of the physical buildings and the street network and the landscape and place character, and also developing new development in a distinctive Gawler style. So that's really about building upon the past and creating the new together. That really points us towards good design, because we think good design is really going to be necessary to integrate quite large amounts of new development within this heritage fabric and this well-established and in some ways quite constrained and small town centre. We do think we're going to have to allow some increased scale of development in the town centre, and one of the ways to do that is to talk about height, so the height of buildings as well as their overall size and footprint. And we do think that an increased development scale of between 2 and 5 stories, depending on the location, is appropriate. And is needed to accommodate the future land uses for this region. So that's quite an important planning provision, and Pat's going to talk you through a little bit later a bit more detail about that and how we might do that. The fourth strategic direction is around movement and place. So that's really integrating our transport and our public realm thinking to improve key streets and spaces, and again you'll hear more about that a bit later on. Vibrancy is an important strategy, so how do we encourage day and evening or night uses and activity in the town centre, making the town centre even more of a destination and extending business opportunities, you know, through the day, through the evening and through the week as well. And lastly, being investment ready. So maybe this was picking up a little bit on business and community reference group, being forward looking and investment ready, so that and promoting Gawler Town Centre as a location to do business and to invest, whether that's investing in a business or investing in a property that would support other businesses. So we've got these 6 strategic directions to explain the vision for the heart of the region. Alright, how does that apply then spatially? So we've got a picture here, and it's just a picture, it's an illustration. The town centre is physically not going to look exactly as how we illustrate it. And Stacey's got a copy of this which you can look at up close as well. And the reason for drawing this 3-dimensional picture, so I should kind of explain. So Murray Street is running up through the centre here, Adelaide Road, down the bottom. The river corridor in green is easier to pick out. We've shown the existing buildings, or some of the existing buildings in orange, and indicatively future buildings in white, some of which are quite big, but they're also, the existing buildings are quite big, so the Woolworths Big W shopping centre is here, the Gawler Central Shopping Centre, railway station are up here, so they're already large buildings in that location. So we will zoom into this and talk through a bit more detail about each section of it, but there's some key moves there that I've listed, 7 key moves as well, which really explain the structure plan. So first of all, it is about planning for growth, planning to accommodate the growth that we predict in the right places, rezoning to accommodate that change, addressing the river. So we think there's an opportunity. A lot of the existing development and businesses and buildings, naturally enough, they face the major streets. They look into Murray Street, look into Adelaide Road. There's a big opportunity to embrace the river corridor more strongly in future development along these types of locations, particularly as we are promoting and supporting more lifestyle-oriented businesses, so hospitality businesses, visitor accommodation, so closer to the green space, and really there's a big opportunity there, I think, for the town centre. Not forgetting the railway station and the opportunity for more transport-oriented development close to the railway station in the north as well. Number 5 key move is about investment in streets and public realm. There's a little bit of repetition in the story I'm telling here, but we think that it's really important to make the town centre work movement-wise, but also to create the right amenity. The word targeted is quite important because we can't spend money everywhere, you can't change every street, you can't rebuild every road. We've got to pick the locations where the best benefit will be created, and in some locations, investing in public realm where it will help stimulate private investment as well. Number 6 will be an interesting one to you. So could there be opportunities to develop council-owned land? There's 2 or 3 parcels of land that at a point in time could be put forward for town centre development. And number 7, investment attraction. It's going to be really important to promote Gawler Town Centre and the benefits and the land and the buildings to outside investors as well as investors who are already here. So I'm going to go into the structure plan in a bit of detail, but I wanted to also tell you how we got to that plan as well. So there's a few slides on the screen, just a little bit explaining. We did lots of opportunities analysis, of course, but we did, through that, we identified about 20 sites which we thought were quite strategic because they had potential for future development. So we know that not every parcel of land will be redeveloped in the next 20 or 30 years, but there are quite a number which, for reasons of ownership or the quality of the existing buildings or infrastructure, or their strategic location or their land use, there could well be opportunities for redevelopment in the future. There's a list of them there. Some of them very prominent, the car sales and repair type uses. Some of the land in the south, such as the MFS and the ambulance site, which is one of the council-owned sites. The Gawler Mill precinct with amazing built heritage and also opportunity. The location of it is an amazing location to redevelop in the future. So we picked 20 sites and we've actually tested them, and I think I flagged with you in November that we would test some different scenarios. We would start with something for a base case, do nothing. What would happen if we didn't make any rezoning changes? What would happen if we didn't do any investment in public realm? But also, what would happen if we tried to focus only on a smaller number of sites that maybe we could leverage the heritage values and adaptive reuse? Alternatively, what would happen if we tried to really focus on the river as a location, or if we took more of a broad approach and looked at all of those strategic sites? So this is just explaining how we got to the structure plan that you're holding up. But we did actually test all those different scenarios, and we did that. We got right down into the weeds, as we say. We did sort of design concepts for each of those sites. We looked at what buildings and land uses could be accommodated on those sites, accommodated based on the size, based on car parking provision. So it's not actually possible just to put bigger and bigger buildings on sites because you need to provision them with parking and with other services. So we tested all of these. We tested it site by site and then aggregated it together. And what we found is really that only the two larger scenarios on the right-hand side of the screen were getting close to meeting those land use demands. So if we really restricted ourselves to a much smaller number of sites, or we didn't do anything, then we wouldn't get anywhere near the retail floor space or visitor accommodation opportunities or healthcare or community uses that we think are needed in the region. So that kind of drew us to say, well, we actually need to potentially allow for quite a lot of different developments to happen at different times on different sites, which is quite complicated and it's quite messy. But we're going to need that quantum to meet those long-term needs. On the positive though, what we found is we can actually accommodate all the future demand in the town centre. And I wasn't sure whether we would be able to. The question coming into this was, well, can we accommodate all the regional needs, or is some of it going to have to go in and out of town centre locations somewhere else? But we actually found that we can accommodate it, but it will take quite a lot of developments to happen. And observations there, we can accommodate the future land use demand. We also know that not all the sites are going to redevelop. Lots of different reasons why sites develop or don't develop, and we can't predict exactly which ones will happen or not happen, so we need to allow a bit of flexibility. We think that at least one of the existing major shopping centres will have to be expanded or replaced to accommodate those needs, and we also think we should stay a bit neutral about which one it is. It doesn't really matter from the overall town centre point of view, but we think at least one of them does have to redevelop. And I've mentioned some of those other details in my summary so far, but you can see there we've tried to take some observations from that scenario testing, which has led us into this structure plan which you've got in front of you. So back to the plan, I'll just talk through each section of it in a little bit more detail so that you can understand what our thinking is. And starting down at the south of Murray Street, so this is actually, that's the mill complex, which is, got amazing potential for adaptive reuse and I guess agglomeration with new buildings integrated into the old buildings, and wouldn't be an amazing location for some kind of visitor accommodation experience. A great place to spend a night or two in Gawler and be close to the river and the open space and be close to the heritage. That's an amazing opportunity for that location, with public realm improvements on Julian Terrace, potentially linking it better into the open space. We've also got a series of sites on Murray Street to the south here which have got great potential for redevelopment for a range of uses, including potentially office uses or residential uses and retail uses, and hopefully mixed use buildings. So that Murray Street South precinct has got a lot of potential. It does include, and we've shown indicatively, this is the council-owned land that's used for the fire and ambulance stations. So in the future, could that be a site for a residentially focused development? Could be spatially, if those existing land uses were no longer needed. And possibly even the what's currently used as an RV parking area on the other side of the road, closer to the river. So it does have potential for that sort of infill development at a point in time. So quite a lot of opportunity there. Moving slightly north on Murray Street. So there's the Stein-Borner car site, which again we talked about last time, but amazing opportunity for a mixed-use development, maybe with visitor accommodation looking out into the open space with some hospitality, restaurant type uses on the ground level. In fact, the land between Murray Street and Julian Terrace has got a great opportunity for infill development, mixed-use development, which has all those amenities that we've spoken about, with much better connections through, so you can walk through between all these sites, and that's the Genios development site, which I saw is fenced off at the moment, and so there's a lot of opportunity in that central location there. Moving north again around Murray Street on both sides, that's the Woolworths Big W site, which is already a substantial development. But could it be further enhanced in the future? This could be 20 years out. Could be an even bigger, more successful shopping centre if the demand was there for it. So we want to allow for that. And I haven't been talking about heights specifically, but when we talk about the 2 to 5 stories, that's one of the sites where you could see 4 or 5 story development, properly designed and interfaced, that could accommodate a lot of future floor space. And you'll see in a little bit later, we've got concepts for improving Julian, Whitelaw Terrace, Todd Street and Murray Street, and maintaining Murray Street as a really high amenity community heart and a high quality Main Street environment, but with those larger mixed use developments alongside it. This is all variations on a theme, so get a bit repetitive potentially, but hopefully you can see what we've been doing with our thinking. The Gawler Central Shopping Centre, which is already providing a lot of services and right close to the railway station, that could be, again, could be a fantastic redevelopment site for more retail, newer retail, but also potentially some other uses. And there could be community uses, could be office uses. A larger development there could have a demand for more parking as well, but we think it's possible to have potentially multi-storey car park as part of that development. But also, why not have a really strong pedestrian spine through the future development, connecting to the station and really helping to maintain the town centre as a really walkable, high quality environment, but on a bigger scale effectively than it is today. And then lastly, going down to Adelaide Road, I guess we saw Adelaide Road and that precinct as having less potential for larger development. Its character is more spacious and its small business character. We have identified some locations where we can see some redevelopment and mixed use redevelopment, such as this location just here. I think that's quite close to the, is it Pizza Hut on the corner there? But largely speaking, maintaining that sort of more fine grain and sort of lower scale development, and also a lower scale public realm improvement as well. So we're going to stop for a second, or more than a second, and get your feedback on that first package of ideas. So we've been talking about the vision, we've been talking about the strategic directions, and I've listed those things on the right there. How well does that vision and strategic direction support the town centre's future, in your views? It'd be great to hear from you. And Stacey, I hope you're going to take some notes for me as well.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. I'll grab some water. Yes.
Yeah, it sounds pretty good to me overall. Probably the question I've got is about the 3 to 5 stories. I probably don't have a problem with even the 4 or 5 maybe, if it's using the topography of Gawler, because we do have those low spots. We also have a lot of basements and things like that, but they're just very concerned about having these standalone 5-story buildings, which, Nord Parade is a really good example of that higher density being done really well away from the main street, and building the car parking into the shopping centres and really having a high traffic flow as well as pedestrian. I think the parade does it very well. My parents were traders there for 40 years, so know that really well, and they're most fortnights. But is some of that sort of focus in this plan as well?
Well, on the heights, and we'll show you some more detail, but the short answer now is that the heights vary based on topography, yes, and location, so slightly lower heights along Murray Street, where you're right in the heritage heart.
Right.
But also the bigger properties lend themselves to more height. They're the ones where you can actually build bigger buildings because you're further away from the street, and so you've got less impact on solar access, sunshine down to the street and footpaths, which we've tested, and also things like views, impacting on views from the streets in Long and short distance views. So we've definitely thought, and it's quite a fine-grained pattern of potential height changes that we propose. It's not just a blanket, it's going to be 5 levels everywhere or 4 levels everywhere. It's quite specific to the different locations based on some of those things that we mentioned. So we'll show you more detail on that, but acknowledging that height's an important one.
I just think that the parade does it very well with the
Yeah.
multi-storey without it
On some
impacting on
bigger-
the main street
On some bigger
impact as well.
sites. Yeah.
Which it's taken a lot of work to sort of get to a really good outcome for the
Yeah.
parade and keep that heritage and keep basically that single-storey frontage
Yeah.
until you go back to the residential areas which are multi-storey, but it just seems to work very well to keep that whole fabric
That
together.
transition. Noting that not all the buildings, even on Murray Street, have those heritage values. There are some that are a bit more knockabout and don't have quite that quality.
Same as the parade.
Yeah.
Probably, I'm sure people at home can hear me. The only thing I wanted to flag as well now, I was going to save it till the end, but stretching your mind back even before I started, Council actually signed up to the Office of Design and Architecture SA Local Government Design Review, where ODASA will essentially bring together a panel of some of Australia's best architects who actually then provide independent design advice to council through larger scale developments. Council chose to sign up to that program. We've not had the opportunity to actually use it yet. I was fortunate enough to sit on a study tour with a panel as part of the Northern Parklands Master Plan a few weeks ago, and we came into Gawler, and they're very excited about the potential opportunity to utilise that program to assist council in providing good design outcomes that talk about, creating the good outcomes that we're all talking about here today with the Town Centre Structure Plan. So that will be like one of the, methods of disposal for us, that once we kind of get the structure plan down and we start to see a new development of scale proposed, we can bring in that third-party independent advice to really help our development assessment team create good outcomes. So yeah, we're really fortunate. We're only one of 3 councils, I think, at the moment that have signed up to that program. So.
Okay.
I echo what David's concern on 2 to 5. I'd like to see a lot more detail on that. I've heard people say, for example, the Prospect Road doesn't work because you've got narrow street with 2 high buildings separating them from the residential barn. The one that probably makes more sense, or is more offensive to me, is the flaming car park down Elizabeth. Again, multi-storey, sits in the middle of the green space. Where's the design element of that? I mean, that's what we want to avoid. So yeah, I think that's something to watch. I'll be interested in seeing more detail.
Great.
It sends a few people, it's concerning. We've been through this several times. I'm not saying it's not time to revisit it, but we could easily damage the main street by too tall development inappropriately.
Or reinvigorate it with the well-designed complementary developments. I mean, that's what we would like to see.
So just on transport-oriented development, is there any, I guess, examples of combining for example, the train station with the shopping centre and that sort of thing that is something that could be, because I don't see it much here, but when I was in Singapore, for example, every train station is connected to a shopping centre, and some of them are inside them, for example, and it just makes things a lot easier and more convenient in a lot of ways. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
And I think the case studies would have to be in a kind of regional or kind of growth area setting, because there's a little bit of that in Adelaide. So above Adelaide Central Station, there's the convention centre, hotels, but you've got state level institutions kind of driving that forward. Much harder to achieve in a lower scale environment, and I think it's the cost, which is a big factor. So maybe the question to ask is, how much additional benefit do we get from having those land uses directly over the railway corridor versus just having them right next to it? Perhaps in this case, having a really well integrated development, closely positioned and integrating with the station would be really quite good. And as soon as you start to build over the rail corridor, you know, the complexities just kind of go sky high, and the number of people you have to deal with. But the question is about case studies, so that's a good question. And we can, I can't remember how many we've included in our benchmarking specifically.
About 6 case studies.
Yeah, I can't remember if we've included building over the railway as a specific
No.
thing.
I mean, I guess my question wasn't specifically about building on the station, but just around the integration in
Yeah.
general, because I think it's fairly unintegrated and unintuitive to get to the, even from the train station to the Coles.
Yeah.
There's sort of a gauntlet through a car park that doesn't have space for pedestrians, and you sort of go around and, you know, it's not built in a way that would suggest you're meant to be able to easily access the public transport.
Yeah, so in our little illustration here, you should be able to see it on the printed sketch, we've shown this kind of grand pedestrian connection directly into the station, and that's indicative, but yeah, we agree with you, we want to achieve that. We've tried to avoid proposing anything specific on the station itself, because it's not something the council can control very easily, and we've tried to focus on the areas which are more in your control. But yeah, I think it's a really good point and topic to raise. Mayor Shanks.
Thank you. Look, I think we've captured the things, and I think the feedback that you're getting is right, and as to be expected. I think topography, utilising the topography, and I do have a little bit of behind the scenes clip that I know we're actually probably going to touch on that in a few slides time as well. But it is that using the high street and street and the like to the best of its advantage potentially. But I think what we're trying to do here is talk to the overarching themes. So if we do talk about the human movement and what opportunities we need to look at, I think Councillor Davis is bang on, because if we are talking about opportunities to make sure that we're promoting that foot traffic, that human movement options, public transport features in those conversations. And it talks not only to getting off of Gawler Central and walking down a Gawler version of a wall, in lack of a better term, let's just call it that. It also talks about how you can catch a bus easily from the other end of the main street, because it's not as easy to walk for some. You know, those sorts of conversations, I think, are capturing your overarching theme, but there will be a time in the not too distant future where we're going to have to bed down and look at those business cases and actually talk about how we are addressing the overarching theme, because the statements are good, but we want them to land right.
Yeah.
And again, topography will play a big part in concerns, and rightful concerns, about the landscape change completely of a heritage town that doesn't have those multi-level buildings. We have multi-level buildings, but it's the integration, and if done tastefully, I think, Councillor Hughes pointed it out well, the Norwood Parade has some tasteful examples of where that could work.
Yeah.
We're not reinventing the wheel, but we are hopefully setting Gawler up to make sure it plays its part in the regional space, and not be ring-rooted around as well.
Any other questions and comments on that high-level strategy, the vision, the heart of the region, the focus on the land use mix? Because we are going to go into the detail shortly as well.
Yes, just some questions first, maybe just around the residential. What's the idea behind that? Is it simply just trying to make sure that there isn't residential in the mix because we've sort of asked for that, or?
Well, in the land use research David Snoswell did, he identified a needs or a potential demand for somewhere in the region of 200 dwellings, aside from the visitor accommodation, and we've allowed for that. I think think we need to stay flexible between residential and visitor accommodation. You know, it's hard to pick which locations would develop for each specific type of types of accommodation. But it's about 200 dwellings plus the visitor accommodation that we're planning for.
I think in terms of the in terms of the visitor accommodation, I think that's fine. But that specific location for residential Murray Street South,
Yeah.
I don't think it lends itself to any of those objectives really, because it's quite detached from the rest of the town. There's also a lot of there's topography issues there. There's traffic issues there that you're not getting across that street at all, and it doesn't lend to passive surveillance or any of the benefits that you would get from having it on an upper story in the actual main street. It's almost a completely separate precinct down with the people in Gawler South and their friends past there. So
Is that the MFS ambulance site?
yeah, that's sorry, the MFS, the ambulance site, right, there's very similar. Second, so just as some feedback on that, but in terms of the existing, I don't know if they're zoned as bulky goods sites, but there are multiple bulky goods sites, particularly at the southern end of Murray Street there. We've got servers, cairns, etc. We talked a bit about rezoning for the purpose of development, but is there an idea of how we could bring those back into something which is utilising the space probably a bit better, or should those businesses move on?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we are talking about. So it's not pushing any existing business or land use out, but it's saying, well, in the long term, there could be a bigger building here or more of a mixed-use building, and the rezoning could make that more attractive to the landowner. And so at a point in time when some of those existing land uses, whether it's car repairs or something similar to that, they have new opportunities and new locations, and they say, well, we could move there, and then, or they're maybe even incentivised to move there, and the land use in the town centre could change. And so maybe that's this balance between what is the development potential for each site, so that it might encourage those uses versus the maintaining the character and design outcomes that you would like to see as well.
Yeah, there seems to be some large spaces down that end of the street, but it's quite, I think that other small business operators down that end of the street are quite constrained by the existing sort of large spaces that are occupied that don't necessarily attract a lot of foot traffic.
Yes, and maybe in some ways, sorry to interrupt, residential or visitor accommodation could actually bring some of that foot traffic in those locations which aren't as good for retail, arguably.
Yeah. I mean, I'm interested in this northern portion, particularly the northern portion, on the other side of the train line. I understand there's some residential and things there at the moment, but it's a space which is that parking area is one hard to get into.
Yeah.
And it's usually underutilised because of the fact that it's hard to navigate. Yeah. But also that there's it is a weird residential sort of space. Houses which are leave open rentals, but not necessarily in condition. Yeah. The only other thing I have from a strategic perspective is that I'm still, in terms of the transport question that we've been asking about where we're going to send the traffic through, to me, talking about the river corridor as a precinct complicates that still, because especially if you put residential down the south, I just don't see how anyone from Gawler East or Concordia actually gets out of Gawler East, because you've got this Linddock Road, which is really quite hard to navigate, and then potentially you're banking up around Ayers Road, banking up the southern end. The river corridors become harder to navigate. I'm not sure where the traffic is and the increased traffic volumes are going to go.
Well, yeah, I mean, Martin will talk about that a little bit more, but you're absolutely right. You've got making the town centre and the land use successful, which is really tricky, and managing the flow, but also creating the amenity. And we've got a few ideas for that, and it's probably more targeted changes around intersections, the points that often cause the delays and the sort of pause points. So Martin's going to take us through that as well.
Thanks.
Just quickly, with the North Parade, there were service stations there, and the change of land use, one of the service stations is now a cinema complex with shops and things like that, and restaurants. So, over time, the last 30 to 40 years, that certainly has changed in that way. But when you look at this diagram, there's a lot of green space, so I'm surprised that green Gawler didn't sort of come up a bit more
As a principle.
yeah, just the way the rivers, and when you look at the actual map itself, it is a lot of space as well. So the big gum trees that we do have, even in the car park of one of our shopping centres and things like that, the big trees are something that is fairly iconic as well. So sort of be good to somehow sort of linking to down the southern end, we've got Dead Man's Pass Reserve, Pioneer Park in the north, and then the north of the main shop, this whole area we've got Conley Park, which all connected by sort of connected by pathways that doesn't really work very well from the main street. But either end have got paths that go along the river
Absolutely.
as well.
And I think it's fair to say that the green and sustainable directions have been put as a sort of sub-principle,
Yeah.
and it still is in there in the long form of the text.
Okay.
But the plan probably focuses more on the the commercial and mixed-use land uses and the street infrastructure.
Yeah.
And it is probably also tied to the future of the open space corridors, a little bit tied to the Northern Parklands directions as well. And whether this plan is going to say a lot about the river corridor, or whether that will be dealt with elsewhere. Maybe what this plan says is the amazing asset that's got a lot of potential in the town centre to embrace, as it is now, never mind what it can be in the future. And yeah, the green in Gawler is still in there as more of a sub-principle at this point. Okay, shall we move into the next layer of detail? Great, thanks for the feedback so far. So Pat and Mike are going to come up and they're going to do a shared presentation for the next 10-15 minutes, and then we'll get more discussions.
Okay, thanks Michael. So I'll be presenting on the big form components, and then Mike will be looking at the more detailed architectural and heritage elements. So we've undertaken a built form framework, which is really looking at building heights, setbacks, scale, and making sure that it really does respond to its context and its environment. It's been derived through the Phillips Pilkington Adaptive Reuse Heritage Reports, the scenario testing, so having a look at the capacity for the town centre, the urban design analysis, which we've undertaken through the background research, but then we've also prepared a set of built form parameters, which starts to shape the overall built form outcome for the town centre. So the first of those being heritage and character. Again, this has really been derived from Phillips Pilkington's work, but we have been receiving advice from them on how best to respond to the heritage fabric within the town centre. They've undertaken a review of 66 heritage sites, the heritage areas, and we're able to really inform the built form outcomes for the town centre through their work. And it was looking at things like making sure that that you reinforce Murray Street street wall with taller elements set back, carefully managing height transition to the Gawler Churchill State Heritage Area, and another being carefully managing height to protect views of the Gawler East escarpment. Another one of the built form parameters is looking at the street wall. So a street wall is really the built form as it interfaces the front property boundary. And so again, from Phyllis Pilkington, they've recommended a 2-storey street wall, which would really maintain that heritage fabric within the town centre. And then also potentially a 3-storey street wall, which ends up fronting onto the river corridor and Apex Park, which would then end up providing a bit more of enclosure, activation and passive surveillance towards the open space. We've also looked at streetscape ratio, which is looking at the relationship between the street width and the building height. That does 2 things. It makes sure that there's a sense of enclosure, that when people are walking down the street they feel safe and comfortable, but then there's also a sense of openness and views towards the sky. Another built form parameter is to make sure that there's solar access to main streets. So particularly along Murray Street, making sure that there's solar access to the footpaths throughout the middle of the day. The same has been applied to all the open spaces, to some of the key urban areas. We've also had a look at the relationship between the street wall and upper levels, looking at visual bulk, its interface with residential properties, having a look at transitions, and that's all within the documentation that we've prepared to date. And that starts to begin to shape the overall built form outcome for the town centre. So that's all well and good, but to be able to enforce this and to provide some clarity to people about what they can do within the town centre, and then also provide some guidance to council and assessing authorities, there is a need to implement the structure plan into the planning code. So at the moment, it's within the Gawler Town Centre's within the township main street zone, which is fairly limited in its ambitions, so it doesn't really align necessarily with the heart of the region from this structure plan. It's quite limiting in terms of its land uses and restricts building heights to 2 storeys, where there does become a bit of a capacity issue for the town centre. So we have proposed the urban activity centre zone, which is more aligned with the vision and the ambitions. There's a little bit more flexibility with the land uses. And then on top of that is proposing the Gawler Town Centre subzone and concept plan, which is a localised planning code for Gawler Town Centre. And that would really speak about all the guidelines, all the ambitions, objectives, the strategic directions that are within this plan, and actually implement it within the planning code. So just having a look at that spatially, the urban activity centre zone would be applied to the main part of Gawler, around Murray Street. And then along Adelaide Road would be the urban corridor living centre zone, which is more of a lower order activity centre zone. It's more focused on residential amenity and at much more of a lower scale. And then along that main part of Murray Street would be the Gawler Town Centre subzone, and then the concept plan, which is next to that. So I'll just run through this concept plan. So this has really been derived from those built form parameters, and it ends up showing a range of building heights. We are showing 4 storeys along Murray Street, 5 storeys along the river corridor, and within those larger strategic sites, such as Coles and Woolworths, where you can actually absorb that additional height. and then some lower scale development around the edges and the periphery of the town centre. But what's important is these interface types, which we're proposing alongside every single one of the boundaries within the town centre. And each of those interface types really looks to manage that height and make sure it responds to the context and to its environment. So in terms of Murray Street, we are putting forward 4 stories, but there is an interface type there, which is to make sure that there's a 2-storey street wall and the upper levels are really recessive behind that, which is to really maintain that heritage fabric along Murray Street. Another example is along the residential interfaces outside of the town centre, and proposing an interface type where there's ground level setbacks, which allows for planted vegetation and canopy trees, and then really recessive upper levels to protect that residential amenity on those adjoining sites. We're also showing key open spaces, and part of this plan is to make sure that there's no overshadowing of these open spaces between 10 AM and 2 PM at the winter solstice. So throughout the whole year, these open spaces will be protected from any overshadowing. The same would apply to Todd Street and Walker Place, as these are important. We've also shown key view lines to the Gawler escarpment, which are important to protect. And then also new pedestrian connections, which ends up aligning with existing connections and some of the key destinations. So that's really just the overall built form in a bit of a quick summary, but I'm sure you've got plenty of questions, which we'll get to shortly.
Okay. Thanks everybody for having me. I'm just going to quickly run through some of our work on heritage and how Gawler might change while also respecting its heritage character. So I'm sure we're all very aware that Gawler's a town with significant heritage value at a state level and even at a national level. Within our study area, there's over 60 local and state heritage places, as Patrick mentioned. There's 3 historic areas within the historic area overlay, which mark out precincts of particular character. And there's also the Gawler Churchill State Heritage Area to the west of the town centre, which overlaps slightly with our study area, and has been marked out as a area of state level significance, and therefore important to consider in our work. So this concentration of heritage places sets Gawler apart within the broader region. It's an asset, I suppose, that other growth areas to the north of Adelaide don't necessarily have, and so it presents Gawler with a unique opportunity to be a place of authenticity and character. So we believe that growth and protection of heritage places are not necessarily mutually exclusive outcomes. And with a thoughtful approach, change can be accommodated in a way that strengthens and reinforces rather than diminishes Gawler's character. And so to that end, we've been working together, Jensen Plus and BPA, to develop a suite of design principles intended to guide future planning and development, particularly pertaining to heritage. As a first step, we undertook, which Patrick mentioned, a fairly detailed heritage analysis of the town centre. I think we all know Murray Street is defined predominantly by single and 2-storey commercial buildings, and they're typically on deep allotments, built to the street boundary. Institutional buildings like the historic bank buildings and the town hall are generally set back, and so that gives some level of variation to the streetscape. But otherwise, it's a pretty consistent and discernible pattern. And while many of the historic verandas, which used to line Murray Street, have been lost over time and replaced with cantilevered awnings, most or many of the historic and heritage buildings are legible, they're intact, and they're of high quality. And so this analysis has then informed our design principles. And the following two slides illustrate, I guess, some of the topics that we've addressed in our guidelines. Overall, we've focused on kind of three, I guess, categories of development. So adaptive reuse, extensions to heritage buildings, and then also infill development in between heritage places. And so just given the time constraints, I'm just going to pick out several of the key principles that illustrate, I guess, the overall direction and speak more generally to things. So I think the first thing to recognise is that development within heritage places should prioritise the retention of heritage fabric as well as footprints where possible. So we want to try and avoid facadism where only the street facade is maintained and then the remainder of the building is lost. Consistent with the borough charter, we want new work to be clearly distinguishable from historic fabric, ensuring that means that this historic fabric is then legible. Rather than trying to replicate historical styles, we believe that contemporary design responses should be encouraged, provided that they're respectful of their context. And where new development adjoins heritage buildings, we think there should be a clear articulation between the new and the old elements. So, as has been sort of discussed a little bit already, building heights within the town centre will require careful calibration. So we believe that it's important to respect the prevailing scale of development, and particularly the heritage context, to maintain the two-storey street wall along Murray Street. So we believe, as Patrick's mentioned, that this can be achieved by setting back taller elements from the primary frontages. And I think it's important to recognise that both the topography and the depth of allotments along Murray Street present an opportunity to accommodate taller development to the rear of sites without them dominating the Murray streetscape. We also believe, I'll move to my next slide, that new buildings should respond to the form and proportions of historic buildings along Murray Street. So, for instance, the rhythm of shop fronts is a defining characteristic along Murray Street, and that could be interpreted in new development. Likewise, heritage buildings often have strong horizontal elements like string courses, plinths, and cornices, and eaves, and these height datum can then be referenced in new constructions. So material selection and detailing also needs to be carefully considered. New development can draw from the established material palette that already exists. There's a lot of stone and brick which could be referenced, and where appropriate, new development should demonstrate a level of craftsmanship and quality. So it's important to recognise also that heritage value extends beyond just individual buildings. We need to try and think, I guess, holistically about the broader setting, which also includes landscape elements and view corridors, which have been mentioned. And all of this together makes a contribution to the character of the town centre. So, for example, there's some key view corridors from the bridge at Apex Park looking towards the escarpment, the Gawler escarpment, which could be protected. The river corridor is an important setting, and it relates to Colonel Light's plan as well of Gawler. So we think future development should be considered holistically. And as Patrick has recognised, design guidelines need to be supported with effective implementation. If there's no statutory weight behind them, these kinds of documents can have limited effect and impact. And so we believe, well, and I guess recommend, that these design guidelines are embedded within the planning and design code sub-zones to ensure that they are able to have a meaningful influence on development outcomes in Gawler. Thanks very much. That concludes our...
Is the next slide? Do you want to read out the question and see what feedback we get?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. So the question is, do the proposed zoning, building heights and design controls achieve the intended outcomes?
No. So the slide 2 back, and it's really hard to read your slides, they're too detailed. If we go back 2 slides, if you put that, next one back, keep going, sorry, must be more, wasn't counting. That one, but it adds the public arena, you're just throwing petrol on the fire. That is too broad brush stroke, and it does not explain things that you've spent quite a bit of time talking to us tonight. That just says the whole of the east side of Murray Street is open to 4-storey development. It doesn't acknowledge that there's some finesse that we're going to avoid the buildings, the heritage buildings and whatever. Just that immediately causes me to go, oh, for God's sake. So that diagram's problematic, and I really cannot see the detail on the left to see what else is being suggested. But that feeds into the worry that we will lose all of our vistas and our views, and I think I'm pleased to hear that. That's really challenging. I guess the vista, and I do view corridors, I understand, and I think that's a great concept, but there's still vistas that people have that live along in those areas that they will want to protect. So people, and I put myself in this because I live up there around Pioneer Park, they have vistas across to Church Hill that would be blocked. So we need to be mindful of that as well. People not losing the views that they, I guess in some respect, treasure, against the fact that we also need to allow development ahead here. I'm not trying to be unsympathetic there. I hear that you embedding the heritage things within the code will give us the ability to ensure that they're implemented. But we've already lost quite a bit of ability under the existing planning situation. So we were very successful when we got Woolies developed to have underground parking there, and that was a major success. We didn't have any ability when Oldie went in to have underground parking there, as I understand. That was state. So what happens then if other, and that could happen to us again, couldn't it? I mean, we have no control about them going straight to the state land. And so rather than 5 stories of multi-car parking, I think the community would like to see more underground occur as well. How do we protect ourselves from that trick happening to us by developers?
Yeah, I might just, there's a couple of questions there. I think the first one in terms of this plan, it does look like quite a simple plan, having a look at it without some additional information. And as I mentioned, there's these interface types which are applied to each one of the interfaces, which does deal with that detail for each of the streets. And so part of the structure plan is to show each of those interfaces and how they should be sensitively designed to protect things like heritage, topography, and really its context and environment. But we haven't included it as part of this package, but it's within the structure plan itself. There's additional details to deal with that. Your query around the, I guess how the assessing authority can, I guess, assess against what we're putting within this plan, or this structure plan is within the planning code, so any application would have to be assessed against those requirements.
Can I just tie on from, just building on from Pat? We got the development like Audi based on the current zoning. So if we want more of that, then we retain the current zoning. So what we want to do is change it for our benefit to get the right types of activities. Having this concept kind of plan overlay through the subzone is different, and that's where we'll get the power, regardless of who the assessing authority is, which is what Pat was saying. But I thank you for your feedback, because when I saw that plan, that was immediately my reaction, because I hadn't read the context. And what's going to be really key for me and for the team is how do we actually explain that to the community? Because this is a very planning overlay plan, and that's how it will look in the code and in the, visually. But that's not how the general community doesn't understand planning building height overlays and all the context behind it and what we're trying to achieve. So I'm already thinking about how can we actually show that and communicate that better to explain that. And so I'm kind of jumping ahead, but where I would like to go with the consultation is I'll try to break it down into more bite-sized fact sheets relevant to particular topics, height being one of them, to really demonstrate, because I know from experience, height always number one. So if we can get that out nice and early and explain that, then hopefully that can kind of cut through for good outcomes.
And I think David mentioned it before, when we talk about 3, 4 or 5, why don't we, can we build in that it's an underground story as well, so that we can take advantage of doing things underground as well, wherever possible. Mainly I'm thinking about car parking, but this thing about always going up, needs to be, anyway, thank you.
Do you want to comment on that, Andrew?
I think I'll just stole my thunder. I was going to talk about the Ginos development as an example where it is 3-storey, but there's a basement car park as well, so it's probably effectively 4-storey. But it's also because of the heritage provisions that applied there, as opposed to the Audi site where there was that context. We took the bookshelves and articulation of buildings, but I think overall, once it's built, that's an example of something which is site sensitive and has some context, probably a bit different to the Audi development. So that's the kind of policy fabric you want throughout the town centre. But I agree that where we can get car parking to be integrated into the development, and we're not simply always talking about being 4 to 5 storey above natural ground level, but using the site and the level differences to maximum benefit. That's what we're after.
Because the Golden Fleece is 4-storey.
Yeah.
2-storey above,
Yeah.
2-storey down.
Correct.
So there's already a 4-storey,
Yeah.
if we think about it in that format, and it's a heritage building. So, we've won.
And the mill, for example, it's a 4-storey building, but because of the elevated roof, it's almost a 5-storey building. So it just comes down to how you get it to work on that site.
One of the things in the past, streetscapes and vistas I've been on panels for a long time, have been very difficult things for panels to actually get really good outcomes about. So I think that any wording with protecting vistas, streetscapes is going to be crucial, because it is really, really hard for panels to actually get that sort of through when we're assessing developments to try and protect some of the streetscapes, and some of the unique characters in streetscapes are sometimes curve-shaped walls or things like that. We're similar situation down by the railway station where the Criterion Hotel and the other hotel, where it was a curved wall that wasn't protected, it wasn't part of the heritage protection that is part of that streetscape. It's actually part of that vista as you come over the bridge and everything else. But we weren't able to really be effective in protecting that streetscape, so or that wall. So it is really important. Also going to that diagram, I think you do need to talk about the cantilever offset somehow to actually try and explain that. And on that, I think we should have got these slides 4 or 5 days ago to sort of actually be able to read this information, because I'm constantly going, okay, you've covered it off now when I've been, so yeah, it's very frustrating. I do these presentations for work, and the councils I go to demand the presentations 7 days before so the councillors can actually read it. I think we're owed that honour as councillors in this council because I have to do it at the other councils that I present to. So I think it's common courtesy for staff to actually give this information so we're not on the back foot all the time. This is quite frustrating for me yeah, very unprofessional, and I just think it just doesn't treat the councillors with respect either. So, but I think that needs to be addressed. Yeah, going back to making sure the vistas and that cantilever and the streetscape is going to be really difficult, I think, but very necessary as well.
Can I pick up on that? I think again, because your old development plan had some additional details around design and topography in the town centre, and that was stripped out by the planning and design code, which they went to more of a statewide approach. So proposing a subzone, and this document is not actually the planning policy, that still needs to be worked through. But it does provide the opportunity to write new policy that's specifically localised to address all these characteristics that we've described and that you were commenting on. So there's probably still work to do to get that planning policy right, and you've got to convince the State Planning Commission and the Planning Minister to adopt it. But as we might have said earlier in the process, this is the chance to put forward what you want to see, both from land use and scale and design, and argue it to say, well, this is the planning policy that we want to see in the town centre, and this is the mechanism to do it. And then it would give the panel, if there is an application in front of the panel, the opportunity to respond to that policy. And if it went to SCAP, if there was some application went to SCAP, they'd be using the same planning policy to assess against. So it's a big opportunity in the subzone. Subzones trump zones. If you have a subzone, the subzone policy is more important than the zone policy. So if you can get a subzone through, which is what we're recommending and going to be advocating for, it's a strong planning setting for the town centre.
And I'll just also add to that the heritage overlay still applies. So even though you have this localised subzone, the heritage overlay is an additional layer of protection that you would have for the town centre.
Patrick, yourself and Michael and others have said a lot about the river. I don't feel that anything much is going to happen about the river, and I'm just a bit interested to hear. I mean, all the houses along 9th Street, where 9th Street is, well, they butt onto the river. And over the years, there's been a few people that have wanted to develop something on there, and they were always knocked back. You're now indicating that in this comment, address the river. To me, there's fantastic potential. But the other thing about it is we had a group of people years ago that removed the humpback weirs in the river. Now that river is flowing water. If you went down with a bulldozer and dug down a couple of metres, you'd have the best swimming hole ever. And so it's full of water. We're not saying to stop it, but it's your vision to see it like a strap out. Well, let me pick out strap out, and you've probably all seen that, how that is. I mean, with it like it is now, council spent a lot of money on walking, cycling trails along it, and it's really beautiful to walk along. But there's only water rats and snakes in down in the river. That to have it full of water all the time would be a draw card to bring people to want to develop along, as you said, address the river. To sit there, look out over the waterway, not to look out over what it is now. Is there any other things that you could tell us about what the plan may be to do with that section of river? Because it's just a valuable asset to Gawler, and we do nothing with it because the weirs have been removed.
I can probably answer that one for you if you want, Pat. The river corridor is a little bit challenging. We're kind of caught in between a rock and a hard place at the moment and are linked in with the Northern Parklands. It might seem like it's a million miles away, but the Northern Parklands is actually split into 2 stages. And you'll get a briefing about this, I think, next week actually, so you'll get more context then. But the Northern Parklands is split into 2 stages. Stage 1 is the covered kind of hillier area. Stage 2 actually is the remaining link, which actually comes through the town centre. At the moment, the indicative pathway actually takes in Apex Park and that river corridor. Part of their master plan that they're looking at the moment with their large consultant team, and they have a significant budget behind this, including biodiversity experts and urban design, water specialists, is how do they get good quality river outcomes, water quality, better biodiversity corridors and all of that. So whilst they're completing that work, and this part of this town centre might fall into part of stage 2, we're letting that process guide what their vision is and how they can invest their time, energy, infrastructure to create those outcomes, because anything that they do in stage 1 will likely be replicated for stage 2, which could potentially be really good things for the town centre. Council also doesn't want to go and invest significant amounts of our own research studies, knowing that the state government's currently doing it as well. It would just be a replication of efforts. So we're patiently waiting. We're very involved in that process and providing lots of feedback. And as soon as you get the briefing next week, and then as further information becomes available, we'll absolutely share that with you. But it is a really exciting project for the town of Gawler and for our town centre to get the benefit of that. Could potentially see really good things, but we're continuing to talk to them about those outcomes and how that will be managed. So yeah, it probably doesn't answer your question for right now, but there is a process happening in the background, which I think will see good outcomes for the entire river corridor.
Yeah, I think if I could just say that back years ago when the Apex Club was formed, they developed that as a park, you know, and they had all these plans. And one man who's still alive, I don't know how much longer he'll be alive, he's nearly as old as me, is John Chamberlain. He used to own LR&M, a huge contracting business that did roads and developments all over. He lives just up Count Road here. And he developed, it's called bentonite. Have you ever heard of bentonite? Yeah. Well, bentonite, I fix my dams with it. It stops the water leaking out the bottom. And right now, you can probably go down to Apex Park and look over and you'll see water there. Because he didn't get council's permission, he put it in just to experiment to show that by putting a layer of that along there, the water would be there all the time because of the seepage of it as a spring. And nothing was ever done. So if there needs to be somebody to talk to, have a coffee with him or give him a run, and that would be knowledge if you're thinking, Patrick, of what to do with that area, because it's such a pristine area, and you know, I'd like to see it before I'm dead, because back there with the water through Dead Man's Pass and all that sort of stuff would be just absolutely beautiful as an asset. And I think, you know, I was hearing Helen and a couple others talk about, or David too, about the developments that are already proposed to be built, and one that could be a bit further over and all this sort of stuff. And you were mentioning about the heritage point. Isn't Murray Street the way it is now? Hasn't the heritage horse bolted? Because, you know, and the verandas are gone. Even the one straight across the road from here used to be a rounded roof. Now it's a square roof and all this. That's what you were referring to, I believe, wasn't it? The old roll top veranda. And how do we, as a town, get that back to that real heritage look? Would cost an absolute fortune, because pretty well all the shops in the main street are owned by very rich market gardeners out here. And there's a couple of shops that don't even have toilets. You know, so where do we start and stop when it comes to the point of the heritage dollar value? I mean, ask Mr. Valalonger over there, you know, like as a developer, to get anything done heritage today costs a lot of money. So I'm just not sure where all of this, it's great to hear, but where it fits to bringing people into Gawler now that we've got 3 land agents in the main street where there used to be, you know, different sorts of shop. They may be able to come up with some ideas to get more people into the town, but I'm trying to get my head around the fact as to where do we go with your planning and all that sort of thing to encourage investors to come in, that they're not going to be bombed down with extra dollars because of heritage matters.
Brian, that's a big ask. Can we move on perhaps to the next section? Because we've already been here for an hour and a half.
Huh?
Yeah.
Sure. 1 or 2 more comments, and then we've got half an hour for the last section. Councillor Solomon.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll try and be really quick. Yes, I agree with Councillor Kelsey, that one there. Just, for example, the piles building at the top. So that's what, 3 at the moment? Is it, it's underground?
Yeah.
Or is it?
Basement 2 levels?
Yeah, so I still don't quite understand that concept plan there. Because that's a heritage building, it's obviously not going anywhere. We're talking about a 2-storey street wall. But there's a 4 there.
Which side is this? Sorry.
It's
Top, the northern end, just before that, the road diverts off there.
slightly
down,
south on the left,
left, up, yeah.
up a little bit.
Up, yeah,
Yeah,
there, yeah.
Yeah, so I think this concept plan is not the only planning parameter, so that's kind of one thing to say.
Yeah.
But this diagram does indicate some of that future potential on sites that are not heritage sites and have other constraints. Planning is so complicated, right? It's hard to follow.
Yeah.
And so, coming to Stacey's point, how do we communicate the growth potential alongside the heritage conservation and integration? And it is tricky.
And
Yeah,
essentially you wouldn't spot zone every single building to be a different height, and that's kind of the challenge, and that's part of the communication. For a site to actually be able to be developed, it's got to be of a width, a depth, a size capable of actually accommodating a development of that size. When you think about our town centre and how many small individual tenancies there are, you have to amalgamate so many in order to get that development opportunity. So when we're talking about 4 and 5 stories, we're really focused on those larger scale, bigger sites that are probably more, like lend themselves to more options for development. Over time, people may choose to look at buildings differently. Piles, for example, you wouldn't do a 3-storey on the street. We've already talked about that you wouldn't have an increase to street wall, but potentially there might be a potential to have an increase in height at the rear, fronting the other street, especially adjoining the car park.
Yes, I understand that, and
Yeah.
we're talking about how we communicate, not like that.
Yeah.
Because that, you put that in a planning document, that to me says, and anyone else looking at it, it's not sitting to our presentation, will say, that looks like there's 4 stories on the streets get there. And we're already saying there's 2 later on, so yes, please don't put that one out publicly, something which is a bit more nuanced in there, and I understand the spot thing, not wanting to point out, but there are heritage buildings that when you just chuck a map like that out, the people will be asking questions about, so even if there's just a caveat on there, something just to say that, but I think actually illustrating in a diagram the 2-storey street wall is a really important factor, and I think maybe there's a sliver in there of some colour by the trying to illustrate it, but it's not enough. Just because that does look like the facadeism that we've just talked about, with not doing, because that's, to me, that says, oh, you have the front of a heritage building there, and behind it is going to be that big something else. The subzone thing, excellent. First time I've heard about it. Wish Kelly Jones would tell us about it rather than do find out that they seem to push about how it's all hopeless and useless and can't do anything. So really great to hear about the subzoning thing. I think that's an excellent idea. It gives it a lot of power to actually shape what this looks like. In terms of underground, and last thing was just what's happening with the existing underground. You've got, there's some car parking opportunities there, but you've got a lot of historic buildings. Have we done any sort of surveying or scoping about what exists that can be utilised under narration?
Going into each building is a little bit of a challenge. What we are doing in the interim of physically going out and doing an audit of basements is we are developing, and this is separate to this project, Andrew and I are looking at this with our internal team, a case study around if you have a building with a basement, how can you actually utilise that, and bringing along building code, planning, what are your options, what's the path of least resistance for you to be able to use that, and if you want to do something different, cool, but these are all the things that you need to consider up front so you don't have to have this vision and then not be able to fulfil it. So we're trying to help the community and those landowners, I guess, understand what their options are and the path of least resistance for them. It might not apply to every single place, but it gives council a bit of an understanding of what can and can't be done potentially. So.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, because we're talking about floor space and we're talking about the need to go up because we don't have this floor space, but there's potentially a lot of underground that we're not considering. I just want to make sure that that's factored in.
Sure. There's a couple more comments and then we'll move on.
Thank you. I think the feedback here, and I'm glad to hear Stacey's talking about those fact sheets because our messaging here is going to be critical. I do know, like I can see your green lines, and I understand you're trying to know the street wall, and I understand the context behind the conversation. And I also have a different view when I see a number of stories. I automatically do think about Undercroft and up because that class all comes into multi-storey development. But that comes with a difference in experience and the like. And it's not something that I'm glad that feedback actually came through because, of course, if you're just looking at the plan, you're going, oh yeah, from ground level up. And it's something we need to integrate. And I also agree with the Adam development, for example. I think that was a really missed opportunity of some Undercroft car parking that actually could have joined in with some Undercroft car parking next door. And I think there was a missed opportunity there that we're hopefully going to try to implement something to say what you can do and avoid that because we have a document, we have some weight to be able to go, hey, if you're going to do this, let's be smart about it. Let's not look at your development in isolation. Let's look about how it actually interacts. But the need for something like this actually is there as well. Like I think this graphic, although intimidating if we don't have the context, actually does provide that simplistic vision of what we need to be able to have as a quick viewpoint for, hey, we're open for business, but you can't just come in and build 5 stories just because you feel like it. I think that's the messaging part where we need to bring people along for that journey. That I know we will, and I know we are. But when we do release those sorts of documents, that I think in a planning document, this sort of makes sense, but the context behind it needs to be really hyperlinked. It needs to be really easy to say 5-story but, so that we are making sure that we're showing and communicating that throughout. But the street wall, I understand the theory behind it, and it's good. I'm glad to hear about the basement stuff. That's the first time I've heard that, because there is a lot of space that is in all these heritage buildings. It's funny because these heritage buildings actually a lot have a second story from street level and a single story from street level down. But the only bit that they can utilise is the street level, because as compliance has come into play and use has changed and whatever, it all came too hard. And storage is pretty much all these spaces are used for, which means on a 3-story property, you only have 1 story that you're utilising.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, something that isn't unique to 1 or 2 buildings throughout the main street. I think that's the majority, realistically.
So not underutilising
Yeah.
our existing assets.
We are utilising, and it took us $15 million to develop this, to utilise the stories that this has to a different level. And to Brian's comment, I think the point around these sorts of conversations or these sorts of plans is that attraction of investment, is that arming our realtors and people, the movers, the shakers, the developers, that look, we know what you can't do, but here's actually what you can do.
there are some boxes to tick, don't get us wrong, you can't just come in and develop us. But we will work with you if you can tick these boxes, and I think we just identifying them without intimidating the public, that their whole landscape's going to change is a tricky task, but I think we all have a part to play in it.
Okay,
Appreciate your comments.
shall we move on to the last section? Thanks.
This is the part that I thought you guys were going to have the most interest in, which is why I put it last, so we'll see how we go.
There's a carrot at the end of the stick.
Okay, so the third section is really about the movement and place and transport and public realm concepts, and Martin is going to take the lead on this, but I'm here to also speak to some of the layers. So we're going to talk about, just quickly, some of the priorities that we want to focus on, but then it's really about a series of projects. So Martin, do you want to take us through this information?
Sure, thank you. We've obviously focused the town centre movement and place priorities onto these 5 that we've listed here. So we've gone through a few iterations. We're thinking about what's important and what we found from some of the analysis, and chosen these 5 as the underpinning priorities for the movement and place projects that we've identified, which we'll talk about next. So fundamentally making sure that the projects and the things that we suggest have a movement and place basis where they consider both the movement of people and the places around them where they want to spend time, so that it's not just traffic and transport focused, it's also considering the land use and how people get around as well as travel through. We're focusing on targeted improvements to make sure we can focus time and money and energy onto those types of projects and improvements that benefit the broader community and all the different types of travel modes. Improving road safety primarily for all different road users, not just traffic. Focusing specifically on pedestrian suitability and friendliness within the spaces to make sure people can get around easily and enjoy being in the spaces that they're in. And making sure that the spaces are clearly signed and wayfinding information is obvious so that people can get around intuitively and know where to get to and how to get around both when they're in a vehicle or when they're walking or riding around. So we chose those as the main obvious pieces of areas of focus to drive some of the projects we'll talk about next. That is a map of the Gawler Town Centre with north facing over here. The red boxes just indicate the different roads and the projects that we've identified. We've got 10 projects that focus on 10 different areas identified as Murray Street, High Street, Murray Street South, Julian Terrace South, Whitewell Julian Terrace, Todd Street, Coleman Street and Murray Street North, White Square and LA Road. And so what I'll do is I'll go through each of those in a more detailed slide so you can see some of the detail behind them all at conceptual level. And there's other smaller scale pieces to some of those projects that might include some signage or some speed limits or some bicycle improvements, as well as some general greening and street tree planting type elements that are integrated within those different concepts. So this is Murray Street first. It's the northern section up near Lindog Road. It focuses on a number of different improvements to the main street, retaining two-way traffic and the car parking as it is, but looking to strengthen the public realm and streetscape space, improving pedestrian and cycling connectivity across the road, making changes at intersections and making visual changes with streetscaping and painted pavement treatments to visualise for the driver, the people, the cyclists, that you're coming into that main street environment. It's different to travelling along the highway or another main arterial road. There's a number of different pictures there that just give an element or an example. Primarily pedestrian crossing improvements that give priority to pedestrians rather than vehicles. Little side roads like Jacob Lane having continuous footpaths so they feel more accessible. They blend in with the natural footpath areas. Streetscape opportunity, more tree plantings, planter boxes, lighting upgrades, and general accessibility improvements such as accessible parking. And then the next slide is just the more southern end of Murray Street near Carlton Road. Similar types of improvements with pedestrian priority crossings, plantings, and side road treatments for pedestrian connectivity. The threshold treatments at side roads to show people that you're crossing an intersection or you're entering a more main street precinct as a visual, just to change the way the main street feels and looks for all the different users. So I'll go fairly quickly over them. I know this is probably the first time we've seen them, but the main thing is drawing these concepts back to those priorities which are underpinning all the different things that have been suggested to try and be consistent across the different roads and streets to align with those priorities that we talked about. So the next one was just a cross-section of Murray Street. So as I said at the start, just retaining that two-way flow of traffic with the parking and a median, but as you can see in some of the concepts, trying to increase some of that median use with limiting some of the turning limits at some of the smaller roads, creating more space for planting and streetscaping, and generally visually improving the space so it's more pedestrian friendly and nicer to be around at all times. And I've got a visualisation which I forgot about, which was there just to give you a really quick snapshot of a contrasting picture of Murray Street up there with this visualisation showing a pedestrian crossing, new development, land use, trees, streetscape, just to give you a quick snapshot. The next street we just looked at as another project was High Street. The main fundamentals for this were retaining a small section of High Street as two-way traffic where the council building is at the more northern end there, and then changing the more southern path down towards Carlton Road to a one-way traffic operation, creating space for some more pedestrian cycling infrastructure such as a shared path, potentially undergrounding some of the power lines, and then generally increasing all the streetscaping, tree planting and street amenity components to the street. And it's just the southern section leading up to Carlton Road is an extension of that first section, all the same sorts of treatments and improvements proposed to be consistent along that section, one way south towards the Carlton Road roundabout. And just a simple cross-section is probably a bit difficult to see from your side, but just visualising the single lane of traffic with space for a footpath on the eastern side, and creating space for that shared path for the pedestrians and cyclists adjacent to the traffic lane. Along with the visualisation there of what it could be, depending on how it goes, with improved shared path, traffic lane, streetscaping, trees, and greater development. Then we move on to Whitelaw Terrace. So this is a section just near the Todd Street roundabout and the post office. Looking at this section of the road and increasing pedestrian connectivity with a pedestrian crossing that gives priority to the pedestrians over the drivers just out the front of the post office on that leg of the roundabout, and adjusting some of the lane widths and traffic space with the parking and the travel lanes to increase the footpath along that eastern side of Whitelaw Terrace, again to improve that pedestrian experience and make it more accessible for all road users rather than just traffic. We've also got undergrounding power lines there as part of that too, because they're along that side where the footpath widening could occur. Then we've got a section of Adelaide Road here. For Adelaide Road, we focused on some streetscape improvements as well as some pedestrian crossing improvements, which is limited on that street at the moment. We've got the one PAC in the middle there, or pedestrian activated crossing in the middle there. The rest of it's just a long white painted median that's in the road, so it's really hard to cross. But you've got a lot of activity each side of the road and encouraging that opportunity for people to link the two sides together with the bus stops that are also along there as well, and making it a space where cyclists have multiple options to travel through a complicated roundabout approach, more accessible parking, high quality street furniture, aiming to make all that space a bit more friendly for all the different users on the street rather than just the traffic. We've got the light square here. This one's looking at adjusting the square slightly to shift the traffic from going around the square to just bypassing one side of it, connecting the Collins Street and Reed Street sections on that eastern side. So rather than having the square act as a large circular roundabout in all directions, rationalising some of the movements to essentially segregate the more western side of the square into the Churchill
heritage area more cleanly, and just allowing the traffic to go along the one side in a two-way operation, which would enable the square to be more easily accessible with the heritage areas, and create more opportunity for crossing between all the different streets surrounding it, and just linking it with the surrounding street network and the locals more cleanly, while having a specific section for the traffic flow to continue between and around Murray Street. Then we've got Todd Street, so we looked at a number of different options for Todd Street as well, but again, fundamentally looking at how we can improve the space and making it more pedestrian and cyclist friendly, managing the access to Murray Street by reducing it down a bit, taking those right turns in and making one way out as an option, making the footpaths wider, improving the pedestrian crossing at the front of the alley near the roundabout, same as what we've proposed on Whitelaw Terrace, and generally making Todd Street a more connecting road for all the different types of road users rather than just for traffic. Murray Street South we've also looked at. This one fundamentally looks at retaining all of its existing cross-section between the curbs, the parking, but improving it with greater streetscaping, tree plantings, crossings, and limiting some of the turning movements at the Bridge Street site. That intersection sort of falls in a bit of a corner, so it's a bit more difficult to navigate, and we can rationalise that down to make it a bit simpler for people to use to get in and out of, while improving some pedestrian accessibility as well. Julian Terrace South, leading up to the mill site there at the corner of the intersection with Bridge Street. Again, looking at making this space, which is a very low speed sort of street at the moment that just left turns out onto Bridge Street, accessible with all the different parking, wider footpaths, integrated with its land use more cleanly to make it more of a space to spend time while still retaining the traffic function through and out onto the main streets. Linking better with the open space and the different land use sites on the surrounding sites. We also looked at some specific sites for signage, so we talked about one of the priorities being wayfinding and signage, and a few of the different comments that we received from either drivers or the community or from the background councils, wayfinding signage. So we looked at different options for both the directional signage for traffic, some parking signage such as these electronic examples which try to give you the numbers of parking spaces between Main Street and some of the parking buildings, and looking at the different locations where we could make it clearer for drivers and for pedestrians and cyclists where they're going to and where they are within the town. There's a number of different signs in the town when you walk through at the moment. It's almost overwhelming with the different signs and all the different competing demands for drivers and pedestrians to look at. So just try and take a focused approach and look at where are people trying to get to, what should we highlight, and what's going to be the main benefit for people, both as residents and as visitors to the town centre, and what information's going to be the best to target with to get those outcomes. Lower speeds to increase that public amenity and improve the spaces for people walking, cycling, and just generally spending time. We've got proposed sites within the town centre to drop to 40, which encourages the traffic to use other streets and allows for people to use the footpaths and crossings in a safer way compared to now. We already have a number of low speeds too, so we've looked at some speed data that suggests that a number of the streets are already operating similarly to these speeds now, so it's essentially formalising some of those concepts under the banner of improving some road safety overall for all. And looking at the cycling pedestrian network, there's Murray Street and a number of surrounding streets can function as connecting streets over the river and over the railway line to enable that connectivity between the different places. There's a limitation between the rail corridor and the river, so trying to maximise and advertise all those different connections to people is really important so that everyone can understand there's multiple options to get around Gawler. Here we've got Coleman Street and Murray Street, mainly Coleman Street up to the intersection with the traffic signals at Murray Street. Similar concepts in terms of narrower footpaths, rationalising traffic lanes, improving streetscape with trees, limiting movements and generally making it a more pleasant space to walk and cycle along, as well as retaining some of the traffic functioning. Yes, I think that's the main parts.
We did look, I might jump in here if that's all right. Yeah, sure. So I want to talk about the evaluation, because we've got these 10 projects, and but we actually did several options for some of the streets. So for example, for Murray Street, we actually did 3 concepts. What we showed you before was really the sort of medium change concept, but we did one which had a lower level of change, less infrastructure, less modification, but we did also test a concept at the bottom of the screen there with a higher degree of change, where we created wider footpaths, we removed some of the traffic lanes and added angled car parking, and we did that so we could test the different alternatives and see what the positives and negatives were from them. So we did that for Murray Street. We also did that for a few other streets. So for example, High Street, we also did a concept which had a much lower level of change, so a lighter, quicker, cheaper version of a walking and cycling route without undergrounding the power. And we had gone through a process, and well, you saw the one with the higher degree of change. And we took all those 10 projects, and I just wanted to say we have done some evaluation of that. So we did a sort of multi-criteria analysis using a business case style assessment to work out how the different concepts addressed the different principles and strategies that we were looking at, and also from an economic point of view, what sort of value we could get from these different designs. And we did do a calibration of that, which led to the projects that Martin was describing. And there's a bit of detail in this, but we also then took it one step further to say, well, what is a reasonable set of projects that council might choose to prioritise, and how much could they cost? So we have done costings, and you can see on the screen there an outline of what could be, say, a 10-year programme of targeted public realm interventions. And then as well as that, on the right-hand side, what projects could be fantastic projects to deliver, but really depend on the land use changing alongside them. So they really rely on the redevelopment of land adjacent, whether that's the mill site, for example, or some of the other sites, Murray Street South, or even the Cowan Street, Murray Street around Gawler Central. Might that be an investment if that centre was to redevelop? So we have done a sort of hierarchy and a prioritisation of that. So it's not just a bunch of concepts. We've tried to evaluate and prioritise them into a reasonable, achievable package, and then also a kind of investment-dependent programme, which again you could use as an incentive with investors to say, well, if you've got ideas for this land, we've also got some ideas of what we could do to improve the public realm and the public amenity adjoining those sites. So there's a bit in that, and we should stop now and allow you to comment on how well those transport and public realm projects are configured and to some degree prioritised. Thank you. Would you like to comment?
Oh, something to say. Obviously, seeing what you're doing there, it's all pretty good. Am I speaking loud enough? How much work's been put into probably more Richards area, the overflow of traffic and that on the outer suburbs, basically, we're out of the main street sort of thing, particularly, well, I'm looking at one part, 14th Street will go absolutely nuts if we start moving everything down to 40, 50 k's in the heart of the city, if they're right, it's going to bypass. So what work's been done in that field?
Martin? In terms of, we looked at some different scenarios for traffic flow. So some of those concepts talk about Mount Murray Street in terms of the number of lanes it has as per existing. High Street being one way, for example. Reducing some localised turning movements at Todd Street, for example. And a lower speed limit along Murray Street and High Street as a minimum sort of step. I guess we didn't look at or consider speed limits specifically as deterrents for using the streets. We focused more on those physical changes where we were rerouting people or reducing intersection turning movements. And then we looked at if you do make changes to different streets in terms of those traffic flow and where people are going, what does that do to the wider network? So our Stouty area has the different streets and roads within the town centre. Making changes to those higher volume streets like Murray Street means that you redistribute that traffic and then you do just sort of pass it around. You don't get a net benefit necessarily, just move it to a different spot. And maybe that different spot that it goes to doesn't have a larger impact, maybe it does. But we're trying to look at it sort of systematically and look at, there's not a lot of benefit to changing lots of different streets within the study area, but if we focus towards where those benefits are and where we can justify with a road safety improvement, that's where we're targeting a change that we propose.
I guess my question more is around, obviously this part is focusing around the heart of all this sort of thing and the impact it's going to have on external, which is probably more Richard's space there, and I guess I understand what you're focusing on, but it is something that would be real, whatever we come and land upon, it's going to have an adverse effect outside.
Richard, do you want to comment on the integrated transport plan and how this might link to what that says?
Is this on? Yeah, it is. I mean, that's a fantastic question, just around how, we balance traffic not only within the town centre but broader across the region. Does sort of play a little bit to the discussion we've been having over the last couple of weeks with works around Cheek Avenue corridor and some of the works around Concordia. Look, I suppose, long story short, just in terms of looking at the town centre, I guess the primary goal is about making a people-focused area and trying to encourage more movement and activity. And sometimes, I guess, through that process, by sort of coming up with treatments that are a little bit harsh, it actually discourages people that otherwise are basically going, like, just travelling through the town centre to try and see other alternatives. Like, there are other routes and other alternatives that they can use. So sometimes by putting that pressure on, actually can have that positive impact. It's not necessarily just about, okay, let's try and maintain capacity within the town centre, because by doing that actually does encourage more people to just use that as a connection or a cut through, because you're effectively increasing the capacity. If there's more population growth, that's just throwing more traffic onto it. You look at some of those other, like some of the other examples that we talked about today. A lot of those areas, yes, the population's growing, but the traffic volume on those main street precincts haven't changed substantially because there's been more investment towards focusing on amenity.
Yeah, not fair. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We've got an Ageing Well advisory group that have lots of community members, and I think I'd suggest that this needs to go to pass them. They've been particularly looking at safety in the main street recently, so it really crosses over. And the slide that gave me most concern in that is the light square. That needs to be, I need to look at that much more carefully. We've got a medical centre there on the left who need ambulance access. Closing the left-hand side may cause them some grief, and I wonder why we're doing that, so I just need to look at that in more detail.
Do you want to just explain, the reason for that? Don't need to go into the concept, but the rationale for trying to make that through movement a little bit easier on the eastern side?
I guess we're trying to look at that square having multiple different entries and exits and therefore conflict points, so trying to rationalise a bit to make it a bit simpler while retaining as much existing access as possible. So the medical centre on the corner has that ambulance access, and that will still be accessible with the way that we are proposing, and the outer areas to the west of that would still be accessible as well. It would just be done in a slightly different route. But again, it's trying to look at that site holistically and not necessarily be led by one specific access component, but trying to find some benefit holistically with it in terms of it being a focus point for the town centre and maintaining that Common Street, Reed Street link primarily for the vehicles that we want to not use Murray Street, while maintaining all the access that they need for the Churchill Heritage area. It's a balancing act.
Can I add to that as well? This is a perfect example of the movement in place. We're trying to provide an alternative route for people who want to go through the city and not to the town centre. So if they take the Cowan Road access through Light Square, it gives people a two-way, more convenient, subconscious route where they don't have to go all the way around the exterior of the Light Square. From a place perspective though, and why I really like this concept, is that at the moment Light Square kind of sits in an island on its own, and it's very hard to actually get to. There's no accessible footpath, you're kind of dodging traffic, and it's quite fast-paced in some spots. What this actually does is moves the traffic to the east of Light Square in a just one smooth motion rather than having to go all the way around. But it actually brings Light Square back into the State Heritage Precinct. I actually see that as a really cool placemaking opportunity where you can actually open up that space to community events, you could close that portion of the road, you could create it as part of a really strong heritage trail and get people to actually interact with the space for probably first time in a long time, because other than kind of unique times of the year, you don't really see people in that space, and so I think there's an opportunity there worth exploring, which is why we popped it in for feedback. Not to say none of these are locked in, and we're obviously here to start that consultation process. But yeah, I thought I'd explain that place component.
Yeah, that's good always to explore. I just, and use that often as I cut through. To my knowledge, most traffic going south goes through there, and most traffic coming north goes that. So people aren't driving around the whole of the square, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They're already using it as a one-way. Yes, it's worth investigating, but I'm just not sure about that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And for your reference for consultation, I plan on engaging with each of the Section 41 working groups in a different capacity and having a think about whether or not we go to them or they will come to us in a workshop style. But yeah, having a think about that, but absolutely.
No, thank you for the presentation. I think I probably have 4 or 5 minor things that I won't drag you through all the slides looking at, but I think in general it is in the direction that I think we'd be looking for. As Councillor Lorna points out, on the proviso that we do figure out the road traffic situation to be able to make Murray Street pedestrian friendly and all that sort of thing, but that is what we want and what we're asking for, so we need to see what it would look like, and that can help us with that. So, but yeah, just in terms of, I don't think I saw sort of, there was the Cowan Street, but there wasn't really the North Murray Street, entering onto Murray Road, that sort of section there, I think, on there. Because that's an area where I think in general the entries and exits around that shopping centre are dodgy. The one from, if you're walking from Light Square to get to the shopping centre, you either walk over the bushes or you walk through the driveway for the cars, and those are the available options to you. And if you come from the train station and you want to get east to Clonley Park, you sort of take your life into your own hands and hope that a car zooming around the corner doesn't take you out when you're trying to get through there. So I think that area in general has some pretty dodgy traffic situations.
That's right. Those sketches didn't really extend very far along those streets, but they could do.
And apart from what Councillor Davis said about Cowan Street, I think that all plans look fairly good in isolation on their own, I guess.
Sure.
I'm just thinking about, once again, that Gawler Concordia traffic, just thinking about going to the post office and trying to get back into Gawler is a long journey. And that Cowan Street intersection, I would have to look at everything much more closely, but the only one that really stands out at the moment is that Cowan Street intersection with Murray Street, where it doesn't work at the moment. You might get 1 or 2 cars through, even if the light's green, which is not signalised for at the moment. You get cars backed up across there anyway because of the hold up with the Lindop Road intersection, and if you're trying to push the majority of traffic through there rather than going the alternative way to go around Julian Whitehall Terrace up onto Murray Street, back out up Ayres Road into Gawler East or even into Gawler South. If you're trying to push traffic back that way to go up Lindop Road into Gawler East, I don't think the Cowan Street intersection is going to work very
necessarily gain, you might just shift. So it's looking holistically, and I talked about those priorities at the start. We're focusing towards making that space in the town centre align with all those priorities, and those priorities don't mention make it better for cars. We're focusing towards that public realm and that place. Because we've already got fixed movement corridors. We can't make more movement corridors within the town centre, so we've got to make the best balancing use of what we've got, while trying to tip the scale a bit more towards the public realm.
Yes, at the moment, it doesn't seem like there is an alternative to balance it out. It's just make it more convenient. But I'm just, but yes, I do get it.
It's called traffic light.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if traffic advice as much as traffic trips, but
it's the trade-offs and then unintended consequences. But it's a complex, real urban place with lots going on and lots of movement and lots of businesses. And one day, some of these land uses might move to another building, and so.
As long as we have alternatives, look, I'm not saying that the placemaking is wrong, but and also we cannot control public transport, but happy to take any suggestions, whether it's from staff or whoever, but in terms of actually having that the street and the place be public transport ready. Ideally, I'd love a tram down the middle of the street, but it's not going to happen this century. So, at least, if we had proposed bus route, if we had some bus stops that made a bit more sense along there, we could at least propose bus routes to stack them.
I'm keen to flesh out the bus stops, make more sense part. We don't do that here tonight, but again, we've got some bus stops along Murray Street. We have limited stops among other areas that sort of tend to go to the outer suburbs more. But the main street is connected with the buses, and there's a few different stops. Usually you're about that 200 metre spacing. So it might just be in the space that minimises the amount of parking impact. So it's, again, that balancing that angle of what's next to the bus stop in terms of land use, where the parking is and where can we fit it in. So
with the moment, it's less about getting people to anywhere in the main street and more about getting people from Gawler East to Gawler Central Railway Station.
Sure.
Or, just the ability for people to get up from the middle of the main street before it goes all the way to Gawler Railway Station. So very much oriented towards getting people out of Gawler East to the train.
Sure, take your point.
Okay. Did you have any other comments? No, I think Mayor Shanks wants to talk.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting because when we do talk about how we deal with the movement that we're currently dealing with now, the domino effects, that comes from a lot of background being locals using the space and actually seeing some of the upgrades cause domino effects. And what we are doing, I think, as a council a lot better is that modelling piece. And again, Richard being able to respond directly to Councillor Warner is exactly that sort of thinking. And I think it really does strengthen our point around what our link roads look like and how we minimise cut-through traffic the best way we can. Because although you might live up Lindon Road, we want to be able to advocate for alternatives if you just want to pass through Gawler in any given day. But if you don't, we do want to promote you coming into Gawler and make it easy for you to stop and stay. So there is a bit of a balancing act, and I think the work that you guys are doing is great, but the relationship with the great work that our traffic engineers and staff and the modelling of the bigger picture, when that integrates, I think it's going to make a lot more sense on the priorities, because you're asking us about the priorities, but I think I will give you a dozen other questions back before I'll give you any of my priority answers, because I do need to understand the pros and cons, where we're pushing, cause and effect. What I do like about the High Street as an example, and this is probably an example that you can relate to each project, but it's that activation. It's High Street is that back road, that cut through, that one of your concepts on the screen actually talks about it being a place where you park and you actually utilise High Street as the shop front, potentially. If the development's done right, you have a shop front on High Street and then maybe a different offering shop front on Murray Street. And that's an activation that's really exciting. Like I think that would be a cool sort of thing. And if we have that same premise where we talk about the Julian Terrace
conversation that I think you're capturing in these projects, which is a cool thing. And I do like the testing ideas. The Cowan Street one, Helen rightfully points out the concerns on it, but you rightfully pointed out why we're looking at it, why it's an interesting thing, because we are dealing with traffic flow there at the moment, and it's a development that I was pretty intimate with the medical centre, that we noticed the volume that uses that as the backtrack. The locals use it, people coming from outside of Gawler don't want to deal with the main street, so that they use it. So there is a cause and effect there where you potentially could provide a nice buffer for traffic that we're dealing with already in that corridor, and activating a really cool area and providing that buffer between the Churchill and that entrance statement becomes even stronger if done right. If done wrong, we're promoting a different route run in an area that people struggle to get out of the Undercroft car park that I believe is the wrong way, even though we built it. It is the wrong way. It shouldn't enter onto the road that way. It should actually enter onto the other private car park that's lower down the hill. A missed opportunity, I believe. One that might get corrected, who knows, as time goes on. But I think we're asking the right questions. But we're at the point where we do need to make sure that we link to the data and the traffic stuff we are working on as well, because if we go out, and we're your test subjects here in this room right now, I've got more questions on what I would prioritise before I give you my priority. And I would say that in this room we're probably, rightfully so, a little bit more educated in the relationship of all this at this point in time. So if we go out for community consultation and ask, what are your priorities? I think we're going to get a little bit of a mixed bag. Does that make sense?
No,
Yeah.
it absolutely does, and it ties into this consultation planning of, calling out each project and then listing pros and cons and the thought process and why we might not have chosen a higher embellishment, i.e. We've tested ideas but you get one $22 million project, or you get 10 smaller targeted projects that improve pedestrian safety and all of those things that we're talking about. And so it'd be just the consultation piece, it's thinking about it already, and we'll come to next steps around dates, but we've given ourselves more time to prepare that consultation material to get it right.
Okay. We're a few minutes over time. Are there any other comments, questions on the movement and place ideas?
Mark, is it?
Martin.
Martin, is that Julian Terrace, Reed Street, Cowan Street is a truck route, because we've got the post office, the Aldi's and Woolies and the Coles and all that sort of stuff. I had a feeling one of the beautiful pictures showed looked like it limited traffic flow in Reed Street. Was I wrong in what I saw there?
Yes, there wasn't any limitation of traffic.
Because the trucks there, all freezer trucks, and they deliver from midnight on.
Yes.
And that sort of stuff, and they just love the roundabout, they go straight over the top, sort of thing. But we've got those shopping centres, so we need to know. But you're well aware that it's a truck route.
That's right, so there's no access restriction along the Reed Street, Cowan Street route. It was all focused towards Murray Street, but we want less traffic, we want more pedestrian-friendly access.
Yeah, don't worry.
Sorry. Just picking up on Councillor Davies' point, I forgot to touch on this as well. That entrance statement for the public transport movement, etc., and then how that then reacts potentially with future planning of the Coles Central site. It'd be cool if we are looking at that entrance statement, that I know this isn't in our remit, but it would be really cool to say, hey, what would be the ultimate solution for if the train line was extended? Like actually having a little bit of line of sight on that to say, if we are activating or if there is an opportunity and whatever else, the best opportunity is option A, underground, option B, over, option C, stopping and then telling people that they're going to walk across to another train station and run through. Even again, this isn't in our remit to a degree, but it is if we're talking about people movement and how that interacts, because it goes to Councillor get to Conway Park from Light Square, what does that look like? And what does it look like with a train station that's only going to get busier as population grows, and also potentially actually end up keeping on going on the line further? How does that interact with what we're talking about as a major thing? Even though, again, it's not our asset, if that makes sense.
And it's an important question and quite a big question. And it's true today we have kind of shied away from taking that on a little bit because of the context around that, but it's a really important question.
Just for people to comment about that, and also if there is that kind of work, just be, I guess, conscious of the potential that train stations to spur line and doesn't actually connect, because they decide to do something else like the Gawler station and connect that to the accordingly going across the main street. Not saying it's going to happen, but population growth doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to become a busier station, and it doesn't necessarily mean that whatever's running to Concordia is going to be along that line there. So just be cautious and plan for that as well.
Yeah, Richard, do you want to go first?
So just to both those questions, both Andrew and I have, I guess, flagged the work that Michael, Martin and the rest of the team are doing in relation to the train corridor. So certainly, I guess, DIT reps are sort of aware of some of those elements, and like Andrew and I certainly sort of have a position just around what would be the best interface if it was to cross Murray Street. Obviously, our grade has a lot of challenges, and we've flagged those as issues. Certainly from a staffing, we're certainly on top of those. But as sort of Martin and Michael articulated, it's tricky because a lot of those elements are a bit out of their control, but we can certainly feed information as we receive as well on that.
And just to close out on that, supporting the structure plan, we will have a development delivery framework. If there are other things that are worthy of investigation over the next 10-year period for our action plan, that might be something that we consider to put in at a trigger point. We might not need to invest time, money, energy right now coming up with a concept for something that might not happen, but if we get further advice that it is a potential, then we can go away, get council budget, run it as a separate project, incorporate it in. So this isn't the end of days. Once this project's locked down and finished, we can add to it and change it at a time.
Okay, should we look to wrap up now, because we've been through the main concepts in 3 stages. Thank you very much for your patience and your input. Stacey, do you want to just take over and talk about what the process and what's coming next?
Very, very quickly, I want to say thank you so much for sticking around. We're, over time, but I really appreciate it. I know we've thrown a lot of content at you. Absolutely happy to share the slides. Absolutely happy to support you in answering any questions as much as I can and are allowed to, even if it's through Andrew. Andrew's across all of the detail contained within. Why we haven't shared the full document as yet, we're still making tweaks, and we will based on feedback tonight. It's 224 pages. There is a lot of content, and I wouldn't expect everyone to be able to read all of that prior to this workshop. It will be shared, obviously. It will be split into 2 sections, the structure plan and then all the supporting documentation to help with ease of reading. And we've tried to summarise that as best as possible to give you the intent behind some of the recommendations that we're currently moving towards. In terms of next steps, we'll take away, do a further draft update. We do have a business and community reference group workshop coming up in April where they will see similar information, and we'll also get their feedback, which may result in further changes. We will have the draft coming to council hopefully in the April meeting. So once we distribute these slides, if anyone has any questions, feedback, you want us to consider that, absolutely happy to take that on board, bring it back to the team prior to us. Probably got a week. The alternative is putting it forward at an alternative time, because what we're hoping to do is get endorsement to go to consultation on the 25th of May, which would be 1 day shy of the next council meeting. So the alternative is we can push it out if we need to, but we really want to have that time and space to prepare all those really important engagement materials that we know are going to be so critical.
Can I ask a question in between that?
Sure.
So how long do we actually get to review the draft?
It'll be normal council. I'll send the slides so you can do some pre-reading. Absolutely happy to do that. I'll pop that into the communique. The timeframes.
What,
I will-
300 pages?
It's 224, I think. We've structured it down.
That's, yeah, rightio. That's a fair bit to take in in,
Yeah.
3-4 days.
Yeah, no, totally understand.
Okay.
How
Any,
this
comments on that,
includes
Chris?
full-page pictures as well, so it's not all content heavy. We've
I don't
covered a
read
lot of
that fast.
yeah, no, that's all right. Yeah, sure.
Just note that next week we've got a session scheduled if needed, briefing session. Yep. I'm just wondering if we actually do a little bit of work from tonight and then present something back. I think my read is that members would probably prefer a bit more time and more eyes on this before.
Sure.
I would appreciate it. I'll need to take it.
Yeah, I think otherwise the risk is
Yeah.
at a council meeting, we are going to.
If
Yeah.
particular things you'd like us, yeah, if there's particular aspects you'd like us to focus on, happy for you to communicate that to Chris or Andrew or myself, probably them two first, and then we can tailor that to meet the needs of the people in this room, so we can lock in on this particular aspects that you want to know more information about, as well as any changes since today.
Yes. Well, I'm sorry, you go. No. Well, I was just going to say, given I've taken notes from tonight and you have as well, we can go through the feedback we've got from tonight, and if there's further clarification we can provide for a workshop. We've got half an hour next week, and we may as well use it. We'll come back and talk about it a bit further. We'll probably let the consultants have a rest unless they want to come back again. Because I don't think things in the budget to keep dragging you out. But
I'm probably more thinking, to go through the draft without public consultation. Realistically, I've
Yeah, of
got
course.
probably 2 days of hard reading to try and get my head around this.
The other,
Maybe not enough time.
The other alternative we've got is ultimately if we're talking about potentially adopting this July, August overall.
Yeah.
Then there's a little bit of flexibility there if we wish to push things back a bit or give a special meeting if it needs be. I mean, that's really in the CEO's hands, but we're flexible from our end, provided council feels like they've got the opportunity to say what they need to say.
Okay.
Yeah, because all we've seen tonight is a series of slides, most of which we can't see in detail. And we've given you feedback on what we picked up from that. As opposed to, I hear what you say, 280-page document, but that's what we're going to need to look in, because that's where the devil in the detail stuff is. So I understand you're still forming it, and it's really nebulous. But from my side, from where I see this, I'm now, the red flag's going up because I don't know enough to give you some decent feedback. So,
If I make a suggestion, I think we've got actually do have some good feedback from tonight to inform some of the areas. We'll come back next Tuesday and use the session if for no other reason to talk about the timeframes, the digestion of information, how we can get elected members fully up to speed, well, as comfortable as you can be before we put anything on the public agenda. I'm just worried that if the elected members aren't up to speed, I can't expect you to make a decision and then get the community excited for the wrong reasons rather than the right reasons. So we're comfortable with that?
Appreciate that.
Yeah, based on slowly.
I'll make a suggestion as well. So, firstly, yeah, that makes perfect sense. It allows us to continue talking about the topic. Also, if we can just understand the elements of the community consultation as well. So, if we can, just a touch point on these are the things that we want to ask the community about, and this is how they link into the plan, and this is why these things are the things that we're asking about early on, and then the things that come after that inform X, Y, Z, and the like. Does that sort of make sense? I think continuing the conversation is certainly the appetite that I'm picking up on as well.
and the timelines, of course, and we don't need to mind anyone, but we really don't want to go into the caretaker period anymore. Not with this one. This could be
Our current program as well before, but yeah, to still give everyone enough time.
Because if we accidentally,
And originally the next week's session, we've delayed it a little bit so we can tweak and make sure that we, update the document to get it in a good spot before we came to talk to you tonight. The next session was originally scheduled to run you over the consultation program. And so this